Hey, thanks for making it to Veterans Info Tap. I'm glad you made it. Hey, today I wanted to talk to you about in-service events. So an in-service event is something that you hear thrown around kind of a lot when it comes to disability compensation claims with the VA, getting that monetary benefit. Now, to me, in-service event is a bit misleading, and I want to kind of run through that and give you my thoughts on it a little bit. Because I feel that term or that saying or whatever you want to call it, in-service event, makes veterans self-segregate out of the realm of VA compensation. And by doing this, it's basically going, okay, an in-service event is needed, and if an in-service event is needed, I don't have one for this condition, that condition, and this condition. So I'm going to run through a couple different scenarios and things that I think about when it comes to VA claims and filing for that VA disability compensation and what's really needed in order to get it approved, right? At the end of the day, that's the number one thing. Get it service connected. The number two thing is getting the right rating. So with that, hit the thumbs up for me, subscribe, share with a friend, all that good stuff. I really appreciate it. It helps get the message out to all those that need it. And if you're not a member, consider joining. It helps the channel and it helps me to find you in the comments. So, diving back into it, in-service event. So, obviously, if there is a condition that you have from an in-service event, obviously all that ties together and that all makes sense. So in some cases where that would be necessary would be, let's say, PTSD. Here's an in-service event that caused my PTSD, right? We were getting shelled. Mortars were landing in our area of operations, and that really sucked and caused a lot of chaos. I was in fear for my life, blah blah blah, and now I have PTSD. Right, so that's an in-service event. Or maybe you were in a convoy and an IED goes off and blows up the vehicle, and you have some damages in your leg or whatever. In-service event. Obviously, it all ties together. It's just kind of telling the story. So barring those things, right, it's all the other stuff. All the other stuff, right, that do you really need an in-service event? No. In my opinion, the answer is no. You don't need an in-service event for many, many things. Sorry for the blue. So now, one example, we'll start with this one, is migraine headaches, right? So you join and so much time goes by, whatever, a few years, then all of a sudden you start getting migraine headaches. Now, was there an in-service event or did they just creep up on you and all of a sudden now you have them, right? Or gastroesophageal reflux disease, your bad heartburn, right? Or your sleep apnea, was there an in-service event that caused that? Okay, these are all things that are service connectable, and how can you prove that there was some sort of magical in-service event that caused you to have those conditions? Now, there might be outlier ways that you can somehow, connect six dots together in order to make that case, but the reality is that you're probably not going to find an in-service, quote-unquote, event to create that. Now, here's one more. Let's say that you are on a 3-day or 4-day weekend, right, while you're in service, and you're out doing whatever you're doing and you get in a car wreck or you get hurt or whatever. I myself, as an example, we were driving from one base to the other. So for those that know, 29 Palms, which is horrible. So that's where I was stationed. But we did some training over in Camp Pendleton. These are both in Southern California. And there's a pretty good distance between the two. I can't remember how far, several hours. And what happened was we were able and allowed to drive our own personal vehicles to Camp Pendleton from 29 Palms. And then we're going to stay there for, 3 weeks, a month, or whatever. So we all drove, a lot of us drove to Camp Pendleton. Then on the drive back, I got in a car accident. I will say, it was my fault, but it wasn't my fault, right? Anyway, I was following a buddy of mine. He had the map. This is before GPS, right? So we're going, and he's running like every yellow light. So I'm kind of going through all the they just turn red as I'm going through them. Then we crest this kind of like over ramp thing that goes over the freeway, and all of a sudden he turns. So he gets to the top of it and he turns, and no blinker, no nothing. So I'm coming and I see him turn, and so then I turn. Well, he cut the car off coming up the hill, so I did a head-on collision, got squished in the car. And they ended up cutting me out with the jaws of life and threw me in the helicopter and flew me to the hospital. And overall, I was fine. I mean, no major issues, no broken bones, no gigantic lacerations or anything like that. So I made out pretty good considering the circumstances. And so did the other people, by the way. So anyway, any injuries that would have been caused by that, right? Back issues, leg issues, neck issues, whatever, are now, if they're ongoing, are now service connectable, right? So in-service event, so the reason for that story, right? In-service event makes many of us go, well, that wasn't really service related. I mean, you were just driving, and especially if it was like a weekend and it was your own kind of time, it makes you think that that's not a service-related injury. So it goes back to the problem of you're looking for an in-service event. That makes you feel like it needs to, like either in combat training or you're doing something for the military, and that's not the case. So when it comes to, and the way that I always explain it, and I mean, it's just the best way that I can do it. Now, there's always little kind of things that sliver off of everything, right? There's always an argument against something. But for the most part, the way I explain it is for a successful claim with the VA, which again is your main goal, successful claim in my mind is getting service connected. That's the number one thing. Then the second piece, again, is to get the correct rating, right? And you have a lot of power on both of those. So the first part is getting that service connection. And I omit, typically, the piece of in-service event in my explanation. So, number one, you have to have time in service, right? So you have a block of time from here to here. Okay, that's your window of opportunity for your claim. Then what happens is, now, that's number one, time in service gives us a window. Number two is I almost said in-service event because of this. You have to have a diagnosis is number two. Diagnosis, a diagnosed condition, right? So you must have something in order to be filing a claim for it. Now, a couple little side notes on the diagnosed condition. It must be chronic in nature or have some sort of residual effects. It needs to have some sort of ongoing problem. So that's number two. So now you have time in service, gives you the window, and you have number two, which is the diagnosis that's an ongoing issue. So that's number two. Number three is a nexus, that link between your time in service and the condition. Now, we'll pause there. That nexus piece, right? This is where you'll often insert that in-service event piece, right? And what I say here is the nexus is not prove to me that the military caused this condition. That's not really what the VA is looking for. Now, yes, if the military caused that condition, and yes, if there was an in-service event, then yes, you can submit that, and yes, you're going to get rated. However, that's only going to represent a small portion of the majority of people's claims. So instead, the idea is, show me that you have a condition that started, manifested, first arose during your time in service, right? Well, if your in-service event happened in service and you have this condition because of that, well, then obviously it manifested during your time in service, and this is why. But also in that is I started getting migraines when I was in. I started to get gastroesophageal reflux disease. I started getting really bad heartburn when I was in. I started getting sleep apnea when I was in. I started to get whatever when I was in, right? So as long as you can point it back to your time in service. Now, here's where the big problem comes with your nexus piece, right? And again, a lot of people will say, show me the in-service event as a way to prove the nexus. Now, again, it makes you self-segregate out of a lot of opportunities. So instead of thinking of that, you need to think of ways that you can prove that your condition manifested during your time in service. Now, you can do that with buddy statements, right? If you have nothing in your file, right? So let's say that you have nothing in your medical files, your service treatment records, you have nothing. No mention of any conditions. You were 100% fine. It poses some issues, right? However, there, especially at the board level, right, where you have your law judges for the appeals, they understand that many of us, especially as you go back in time, didn't really go to the doctor for anything, and you're sure as heck weren't getting stuff input into your records. So, buddy statements, people that you may have served with, people that may have known you during your time in service that could attest to knowing, you know what, I remember you had bad migraines all the time. Or I remember you had bad heartburn. You were always eating those Tums. I remember, right? Or I remember your feet really hurt. I remember you had that plantar fasciitis. Or I remember that your back, whatever, right? Whatever the story is. And then they attest to it and they write it down. So buddy statement. Follow that up with a nexus letter, right, from your doctor. Nexus letter helps to establish your nexus. This is what we're talking about here. So the doctor's just saying that it's at least likely as not, or more than likely, that your condition manifested or was caused by your time in service. And that helps to establish that nexus. Now, if that's kind of your worst case scenario of building that information, you could write a letter yourself explaining the situation regarding your condition and how you believe that it manifested during your time in service. You can also thumb through your military records, thumb through those service treatment records. You may have complained or wrote down or checked a box or something that indicates some sort of signs or symptoms that relate to your diagnosed condition that you could tie back and go, look, here's some proof while I was in service. For example, on your annual health assessments, right, and an exit health assessment, and I know not everybody did these. Some people, you know, that were handed a raw deal. For me, getting out in '97 from the Marine Corps, I did have an exit health assessment in which I had a bunch of boxes that I checked. I did check a box, and basically it says, have you now or have you ever experienced any of the following? And I checked the box that said heartburn. Well, heartburn was checked, and the form was signed by, I don't remember, an 04, 05, right? So a major or a lieutenant colonel signed off on the form, who was a physician's assistant or a medical doctor, or a nurse, I don't know, right? But a medical professional, right? So now I have a document in my file that says I complained of heartburn, and it was signed by a medical provider on a military document during my time in service, okay? So now heartburn is one of the symptoms of GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. So then it makes it pretty easy for your doctor to then write you a very strong nexus letter that your GERD manifested during your time in service, evidenced by your complaints of heartburn while in service. Follow that up with your own letter about how you pop a bunch of Tums and antacids and so forth. And by the way, the medics or corpsmen would give you antacid as just give-me's. They don't write anything down. It's not a controlled substance. So they didn't say, I gave, Joe Snuffy 15 antacids today. There's nothing written down. So they can't track that. So it's one of those things where prove to me that I didn't get that from the medic, right, or the corpsman. Same with Motrin, same with Benadryl, right? Prove to me that they didn't give it to me. I'm telling you they did, and I got it from them almost every day, right? 800 milligram Motrins, some Benadryl in the summertime, and some antacids, right? So with that, I'm going to wrap it up with, don't put yourself in a corner focusing on in-service event. Okay, you don't need to have an in-service event. You need to have a diagnosed condition that first manifested during your time in service, right? That's what you need. Thanks for watching. I appreciate you. Have a great one. And remember, if we don't take care of each other, something went wrong.